Welcome to Fresh Outlook. I'm Frank Cipolla. We're happy you're with us today. The situation in the Middle East, always problematic, getting even more complicated now as Russia has jumped into the fray with its military support of the Syrian government. The question is why, and what exactly is the motivation of Russian President Vladimir Putin? Joining us today to make sense of the latest Middle East development is Professor John Davenport, who, among other things, is the Director of Peace and Justice Studies at Fordham University. Also with us, Professor Bill Rosenberg from Drexel University, who specializes in local, regional, and national politics, and Sebastian Aulich, who is an international lawyer and consultant. And finally, on hand via Skype is Robert Cunningham, who is a veteran war photographer and author of a book about the time he spent in that part of the world titled Art Meets War. Gentlemen, welcome. Let's discuss what's going on in Syria. We saw that Russia is taking a more active role in Syria. To break it down to its very essence, why? Why is this happening?
Well, people look at the obvious immediate issues with ISIS and the fact that Russia has naval bases on the Mediterranean in Syria that they want to be able to preserve. But I really think those are not the main reason. The main reason goes back to what happened in the Arab Spring in 2011, 2012. Putin saw the dominoes falling.
Right.
Dictators across that whole region collapsing in the face of popular protests, uprisings. And the same thing began in Syria in 2011. There was a popular uprising, peaceful at the beginning, mostly moderate Sunnis, joined by some Shia in Syria, who were trying to protest for greater political freedoms to get him out of power.
Why wait 4 years? If you saw this coming, Professor Rosenberg, why do you wait 4 years?
Well, I think basically the world has evolved since those 4 years have transpired. ISIS has become much more prevalent, and I think ISIS gives Vladimir Putin a lot of cover to do what he wants. I mean, if you take a look, we're not talking about the Ukraine anymore. We're not talking about Crimea anymore. Those are all sort of cold spots that have never really been resolved. They're cold conflicts. And the country of Syria has had a long-standing military relationship with Russia. And this is just the next step. It's a way that Putin can maintain his status as helping out one of his allies and claim that the United States really doesn't. And as a result, it boosts his presence not only in Russia, but also in the Middle East.
And Sebastian Aulich, I've heard this argument again and again. The reason why this is happening is because the United States is not leading in that region.
Well, that's partly correct. I would agree with that. Just to expand to what the professor said, I think that Russia doesn't really have any strategic interest in Syria. It's more being driven by the domestic situation that they have right now in Russia, that Putin doesn't really have any kind of success that he can sell to his own people. So he tries to find something that to look victorious, to look strong to his own constituencies. Now, when you ask about this, the United States is pretty much taking a step back from the Middle East. At the beginning of the 90s, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the Russia and the Soviets had 500,000 troops in the Eastern Europe,
right,
including 200,000 Eastern Germany alone.
Right.
And for some reason, they just decided to take those troops and withdraw. And what happened afterwards was like power vacuum. And we've seen that right away, pretty much a couple of years after NATO moved in to Eastern Europe, they expanded. European Union followed. So you can see wherever it's power vacuum, somebody else comes in and takes the place. And I believe in the United States, the foreign policy right now, we see this from the Obama administration, they are taking a step back, making this power vacuum, whether that's Iraq or...
All right, you bring up a very good point. Let's just go to Robert Cunningham via Skype. What good is it for any country to get involved in the quagmire that is Syria and the Middle East in general?
No, we have to look at the what's our area of responsibility, what is our interest, but more importantly, what should be there. You know, President Obama recently, after receiving the intelligence briefs, made his decision to keep our troops there in Afghanistan for a little while longer, and that's, you know, it's one of those things many people call Afghanistan, you know, the graveyard of empires. And getting involved in there was to help the Afghan people as well as to protect our own interests and such. So there is a time in which you have to look and protect the people that are non-combatants that are getting killed in a certain region. That's worldwide, not just with Afghanistan.
All right, let me stop you there. Let's hear from the man himself. We have a little video of Vladimir Putin. He was on the Charlie Rose show. So let's take a look at this and then we'll comment.
Syria. I'd like to recommend to them the following. They should send this message to the Syrian people. It's only the Syrian people who are entitled to decide who should govern their country and how. We support the legitimate government of Syria.
Now, I've heard this argument as well. You have Russia trying to get rid of ISIS. You have the Syrians fighting in some way, shape, or form ISIS, who threaten their country. Why should the United States get involved to begin with? If everybody's going after ISIS, why don't we just step away and let them do it?
There are a lot of reasons. Okay, one of them, though, is not maybe so apparent to many of your viewers, but there's a human rights issue. I mean, it ends up that the leader of Syria is killing his own people. It was the same argument that we used against Saddam Hussein in terms of killing people within his own country. When Barack Obama a few years ago drew the line in the sand, unfortunately for Barack Obama, he turned around and there was no one following him. He had Lindsey Graham and McCain, and that was about it in Congress. So while he wanted to act in some way in a more military way, he did not have support of the American Congress or the American people.
Professor Davenport, do you think the American public in general has had their fill of this stuff?
I don't think the American public understands what's going on in Syria at all. First of all, there is no Syrian people left. The community has been divided. 300,000 people have been killed in Syria. 4 million people have left the country. I mean, that's a sizable percentage of the entire population. Many millions more displaced within. There is no Syrian people left to decide. I think people like Charlie Rose should not be interviewing Vladimir Putin, to be honest.
Why?
Because Putin is a liar, first of all. He's lied again and again and again. Why would anyone believe anything that Putin says or that any other Russian official?
But he is the leader of a major country.
Right.
A major superpower.
Everything he says is calculated to deceive. Absolutely, without doubt. Everything that he and his foreign minister and everyone else who works for him says on this matter is calculated to deceive. As I said at the beginning, the main reason that he did this is to try to prevent the spread of democracy throughout this region, because he realizes that threatens his own near dictatorship in Russia if it continues.
Now, Sebastian, you're nodding here. So you're in agreement with that?
I think that's very well said. That's straight on point. I would only add, in terms of U.S. foreign policy, is that, remember, Barack Obama, both the Democratic Party, but later on even the Republican Party, criticizing George Bush for going into Iraq.
Yes.
So they put themselves into this corner that they had criticized that intervention so much, even on the human rights terms, because you could justify that you go into Iraq just because Hussein was killing the Kurds. But now, once they put themselves in the corner, it's very hard to make a counter-argument that we should go into Syria right now on the same, using the same kind of arguments or the same kind of logic to stop the genocide.
Now, by the way, we're going to talk about the refugee issue in the next segment, so we'll put that aside for just a moment. But getting back to Syria, Professor Rosenberg, was there ever a chance that it was going to be democratic anyway? It seems like it's too much of a mess to be anything.
Well, it was going to be a problem. The issue really was that the window probably for the United States to act was probably 3 years ago, when the Free Syrian Army, if there was such a thing, still was combating directly against Assad.
But it seems to me that democracy.
Once, though, they did not get our support, they looked over their shoulders both ways, and the only group that they saw that was willing to help support them was ISIS. So what happened was it created an unholy alliance. Then the United States couldn't easily go in and help the Free Syrian moderates because they'd also be helping ISIS. So it put us in a terrible position. And I think what we have to recognize is ultimately Putin did a very deft move. He came in, was sort of unexpected, and started to say, I'm going to support Assad and I'm going to go against ISIS. And the rest of the world was probably caught a little bit off guard.
You think
and as a result, the United States does not want to get into war with Russia over aircraft getting in combat situations with each other, no-fly zones and so forth. So what happens is they're backing off and they're letting Russia sort of do what they're going to do, but trying to maintain an accountability that the wrong people aren't being murdered. That's what I think the U.S. is doing.
Mr. Cunningham, you've been in that region. You wrote a book. It's called The Art Meets War. So tell us what you have seen in that region for people who have never been there.
the human rights violations situation is a huge deal, and that's an argument. As you said, they're reusing that argument, but that argument is still a valid argument when you see it. When you go to places and you see people being mutilated, you see people witnessing atrocities daily, and this becomes commonplace when you see beheadings or things to the point where the people in the area are just desensitized to it, so it's so commonplace. This is not right. So this is something that should be dealt with, and I concur certainly with the statement that we should have acted sooner, not later. Right now we're looking at hindsight on what could have been done to prevent this situation rather than preventing it in the first place.
And what was your motivation to write this book?
We had U.S. troops going and operating within the region over there. People would come home. People would thank them for what they're doing. But as was mentioned, the American people are not properly aware or briefed on what's really going on in that region. So with the camera, I hope to bring more attention to that region and what was going on, so that people could be more informed as to what not only our own forces face, but what the people in the region face.
All right, let's throw this out to the panel. You all make very good points, but why should Mr. and Mrs. John Q. Public in Peoria really care about what's happening in Syria? Why?
Well, if I may, I still think, and I agree with the analysis, by the way, that we should have acted 2 or 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. I still think that we need to act now. And there are several reasons, not only the rise of ISIS, which results from the atrocities that Putin has committed. I mean, he's killed over 200,000 people on the Sunni side.
But that's not the only place in the world where there is that type of killing.
200,000 is more than the death toll in Bosnia, which definitely we saw as sufficient to warrant some kind of military intervention.
Let me play devil's advocate. Different time. Totally different time.
Very similar dynamic, though. An ethnic killing, one group against another, but now one of the reasons that we've got a strategic interest in this issue is that it looks to many people in the region. This is also true in Turkey, which is one of our NATO allies. Like the United States has taken a side in an ethnic conflict or religious sectarian conflict on the Shia side. We put basically a Shia government in power in Iraq, and now we've refused to act against a minority Shia regime that, as I said, has killed 200,000 Sunnis. So you've got, Turkey with 75% Sunni population saying, well, the United States doesn't care about Sunnis.
Hindsight is always 20/20.
I think
you want to add to that?
I think when you ask why should we care?
Yeah, why should we?
Well, the reality is you have ISIS, which is trying to create a caliphate over the whole region, from Turkey all the way around to Egypt. If they're not stopped, they're going to be successful at doing that. If we leave Syria alone and we don't.
Why do you think they will be successful? They are relatively small to all the armies in the Middle East. Why do you think?
Because those other armies are not going in there and fighting them. Basically, they're taking over. They control the second largest city in Iraq.
But isn't it in their best interest to stop this wave? And why won't they step in?
Well, we need more than a half-hour program to do that. But what I'm trying to say is that if you take a look at that region, if one more country falls, okay, like Syria, and if Syria falls, likely Lebanon will fall, because it's just a next-door proxy.
So we're back to the Vietnam domino theory.
No, what we're back to is the fact that at some point we have to say what's important to us in the United States in terms of our values and our morals, and decide who we're going to be willing to stand up for and who we're not. And what happens is, unless we make that decision and make it in a concrete way, we're not going to be players in the game.
We have 1 minute left, and we're going to leave it for.
Well, another issue is this: that you have international responsibility to protect. That's your concept. You can have humanitarian intervention. You can engage Europe and other countries and other continents to do this. Now, just to expand on this point, Barack Obama has brought into his foreign policy team people like Samantha Power, who got the Pulitzer Prize because she argued that U.S. foreign policy was wrong because it was never acting on time to stop genocide. And so you bring somebody like that to your team, and then you pretty much do nothing about genocide, outside. It's sort of, counterproductive. I think it's a huge disappointment, even on the Democratic side.
Okay, we're gonna give 30 seconds to Mr. Cunningham, who joins us as well, and he's the author of Art Meets War. Is there a solution to this, yes or no? And what would that be? And I'm only giving you 30 seconds. I should give you 30 minutes.
No, there is a solution to it, and unfortunately, the statement is you have to look at the people in the region, and you have to give them a chance to run their own country, their own facilities. But then you have to be willing to support them when they ask for help. When the Free Syrian people and such ask for help, we have to be willing to go in there and give them the aid that they need in the situation. So throughout the whole region, we need to be having a more open discourse, and then actually be able to give them the aid that they need.
Okay, Robert Cunningham, the author of Art Meets War, thank you so much. You're going to go. The rest of the panel sticking around. We're going to be talking about the refugee issue. And when we return, the refugee crisis that the unrest in the Middle East has spawned and what the world community needs to do to make that transition easier. We'll be right back.